Now we have seen how we can use store in Svelte. Now let's practice this functionality with different examples. So let's start with a simple scenario. Let's create a new store right here in the stores.js, and let's call this one as counter, and this is going to be number and its initial value is 0. Let's export this one from this module, and let's use this store and let's update this value, and let's do that here in the app. So importing this counter from stores, and let's add button somewhere here. Let's say after the language selectors, let's add 2 buttons here, and this one will increase the counter and the other one will decrease the counter. And let's listen click events for each. So basically we can define inline function here, and we can, like this, we can call counter, this is the store, and we call its set value, and we need to know the initial count value, so we can do that one like this. Right here we can subscribe to this counter, and it's going to be calling this function, and the value will be the initial value in this counter state. So let's assign this to a variable here. Let's call this one as count, and let's say it is initially 0, and here whenever the counter is changed, it's going to be calling this function with the latest value in that store. So let's update our local count variable with the value we are receiving from that store. And basically we are going to increase that count when we click this plus button. So we are going to set the counter with the actual count plus 1, and we will do similar thing for the minus button, and in this one we will be decreasing the count. And let's also display the count somewhere here. Let's add a new div, and in this div let's display the count. So saving these changes, now we are seeing this 0, this count is visible right here after the language selector, and we have the buttons. Now if I click the plus sign, it is increasing the counter, and if I click the minus, it is decreasing the counter. Alternatively, we can update this counter value like this. Instead of calling the set is directly setting value to it, we can use it has another function, update, and this function is taking a callback function. So we define another function as a parameter to this update, and this function will be called by the store, and when it's going to be calling this one, it's going to be passing the previous value of that store. So we will be able to get the previous value, and all we can do is return new value, which is previous value plus 1. And similarly for the minus button action, we will be taking the previous value and we will be subtracting 1. Saving this, and let's show the code with word wrapping. Now I'm clicking the plus sign and it is increasing the counter, and if I click the minus, it is decreasing the counter. Now let's say we want to access to this count value in user page. So just like we subscribed to this counter in app Svelte, we will be subscribing to counter. So let's first import counter from going one directory up. There is store folder and there is stores in it, and we are going to be calling counter subscribe, and this is going to be calling this function with the latest count value in it. And let's just console log this value. Current count is this value. So saving this one. Now let's also open the console. Since we are having this console log right here, we need to check the developer tools console tab right here. Now I'm clicking the plus sign. Here we can see the counter is increasing, but we don't see any logs right here because the user page is not visible. So let's click this user one. So the user page is opened, and here we are seeing this log coming from the user page. Current count is 4, and if I click the plus or minus, here we can see the count is changing, and also we are receiving this console log coming from this user page. Now let's go back to home page and let's click the buttons once again. Now whenever we click the buttons, even the user page is not visible, we are still seeing the console logs are printed because the subscription we are having in this component is still active. Now let's navigate back and forth between home page and user pages. So switching pages a couple of times, and let's click the plus sign. Here we are seeing this current count is 6 is printed 4 times. So whenever we open the user page, we are subscribing to the counter, and when we navigate back home, that subscription is remaining there, and when we open the user page once again, we are adding a new subscription. So we are subscribing multiple times to this store, and this behavior can lead memory leak and break our application. When subscribing the store, we must be making sure that component to unsubscribe from that store if it is going to be removed from that screen. So far we have seen only one lifecycle hook for component, and that was, let's show that again, and that was this on mount coming from this Svelte. And in this on mount we are calling this one with a function, this callback function, and this function is called whenever the component is mounted. So let's see that. So going to home page and opening user page, here we are seeing the mounted is printed. So if we go back and forth, we are seeing the mounted printed again. So just like this one, there is another lifecycle function, and that is on destroy. So this one is called whenever this component is removed from the screen. So console log destroyed. So let's see this one too. So opening the user page, we see mounted, and going back to home page, and the user page is destroyed. By the way, here in this user page, we are making this API call, which is loading the user from backend. With this implementation, whenever the element, whenever this component is rendered, this part is run, but that doesn't mean the component is mounted to the screen. Let's also have a log, something like this. This will be printed too. So let's try this one. So opening the user page, here we can see this will be printed to is printed before the component is mounted. Let's try that one couple more times. And here we can see this will be printed. So the code we are executing right here is also executed, but it is executed before the component is mounted. So basically we are calling this getUserById, but at that moment the component is not mounted yet. If our action requires our component to be mounted, then we need to use this onMount lifecycle function. Otherwise it is fine to go like this. But there is another advantage of onMount. If we are having server-side rendering, this onMount is never called. So for instance, if we are rendering this user page on server side, then the server will already be aware of the user information, so we wouldn't need to pass this page to client, the browser, and expect it to make the second API call to pull user. So for those cases, if we are using the server-side rendering, then we must be putting this initial API call part to this onMount if we are able to update this page on server-side rendering with the corresponding user. So this was a bit about the lifecycle functions. Now let's get back to our issue. Here we are subscribing to this counter, and the subscription count is constantly increasing as we go back and forth between pages, and here we can see this is printed 6 times. So there are 6 subscribed callback functions, and each of them are being called whenever this store is updated. Now what we will do is, if we are unmounted, if the user page will no longer be visible, we are going to use this onDestroy function to unsubscribe from this counter. And we can get unsubscription option from this subscribe returned value. So it is returning a function for unsubscribe. So let's assign it to a variable here. Let's call this one as unsubscribe. So we can call this unsubscribe right here in this onDestroy. So let's save this one and let's test this on browser. And here, going to user page, now increasing the counter, and it is printing the current count is this one in user page. Going back to home page, and if I continue to click the buttons, we no longer see the console log coming from the user page. So we are subscribing to this store, and we are unsubscribing from that store like this. Svelte has another shorter way to handle this subscription and unsubscription parts. Now removing this onMount and onDestroy, and removing these console logs too. Now let's define a reactive declaration here. So we are going to console log, and the value, let's say this is going to be like this again, current count. Now we are going to print the value coming from counter. This time we will not use the subscription, but all we will do is use $counter. So whenever the counter is updated, we will be aware of this change, and this part will be printing what the counter is actually having. So saving this one. Now let's open the console, going to user page and clicking the plus sign, clicking the minus sign. We are seeing the logs. Going back to home page and clicking the plus, clicking the minus, and we don't see the logs coming from this user page. Basically this this usage, this $ counter reference to the store, is automatically subscribing to the store and also handling automatic unsubscription from that store. We can use the same function right here in app. Instead of using this subscription, let's remove this one. Now we are going to use the value in the store, and we can access to that value like this, counter $ the store name, and we can also update the value like this, again using the $ counter, and we are going to increase its value by 1, so we can directly do this. We are adding 1 to the existing value, and same thing for the minus case like this. So this is going to be decreasing the counter by 1 in each click, saving this. And if I click the plus sign, it is increasing. If I click the minus sign, it is decreasing. So with this way, the implementation is more simpler and safer. So we are not really need to handle the unsubscription part. It is automatically subscribed, and it is automatically unsubscribed when the component is unmounted from the page. Any name beginning with this $ is assumed to refer to a store value. It is a reserved character. We can use it with only store variables. And previously we have used this one in sign up page right here. This underscore coming from the translation library is actually a store, and we are automatically subscribing and unsubscribing with this $ usage of that function. Now we can use same approach in navigation bar. So we are subscribed to auth, and we are listening the changes in the is logged in and user ID. Now instead of having the local reference to the store values, we can just use like this. The is logged in is coming from this auth stores is logged in parameter, and similarly this logged in user ID is coming from auth ID. Now we don't need this part anymore. So saving this, and on this page we can confirm that logic is working because the layout is showing the logged in user. There is my profile link here, which means it is taking the value from store, checking this logged in value and showing the layout based on that, and we are able to click that link and it is open this user's page. We are also using the store in login page. Right here the auth store is updated after the login success, and for this one we can just set the auth like this, $auth is equal to the object we are setting. So is logged in is true and the ID is this one. So saving this. Now let's try this one. So opening the application and clearing the auth, refreshing this page. Now we are not logged in, and let's log in with user1@mail.com, password, and here the auth is updated with this logged in user ID and is logged in true. The store we are using right here is writable. There is store of readable also. In those stores, the value cannot be set from outside. So in login page, we are setting value to this auth store because it is writable. Right here, it is writable. Also, we can set the counter like this one, since it is writable. But for the readable stores, we cannot set value from outside. And these stores can be used for background tasks like tracking the mouse positions or the geolocation of user. Now let's show an example about it. Let's change this counter to readable one. So importing readable from Svelte store. Now instead of writable, we will call readable, and readable is again looking for initial value, and let's say it is 0, and it is also taking second argument, and this is the start and stop notifier function. So this function is like this, so we are defining it inline. To update this value of this store, it is calling this callback function with the set functionality. So if we want to update this store value, we will call set. And let's create a task right here. It's not a task triggered by user event, but it's more like a background task. So let's say we are just going to repeatedly generate a value. Let's say the set interval will run this function in each second. So this is 1 second in milliseconds. So we are going to let's say we will have a value which is initially 0, and here we are going to increase the value by 1, and let's set this counter's value to this one, and let's save this one. Now here in this part the counter is increasing, and we don't need to do anything for this one. Now let's also open the console right here, and let's try to click the plus sign. So this plus was basically updating the counter value by 1, and let's see what's going to happen if we click that one. Here it is having this error, so either we increase it or we decrease the number. It is failing because this store is actually does not have set function, so it's not allowing us to set value to this one. And now let's do this one. Let's remove this counter usage from app, and let's leave it just in the user page. So saving it. Now no one is using the counter, and let's open the console, going to user page, and here the counter is 0, 1, 2, it is increasing. Let's go back to home page. Now since we are unsubscribed from the counter, we no longer see the logs, but if we go back, here it is having two logs printed at the same time. One is counting from different value and the other is started from 1. So the problem is this readable store is creating new interval when it has new subscription. When the user page is opened for the second time, it is calling this counter once again, and this is creating a new interval which is starting from 0, but the previous interval is not destroyed. So the one initialized for the first time is still running, and it is updating this value. So this interval must be cleared if store is not being used by any component. So this starter function has a functionality like we have seen in the actions. It is looking for a function to be returned. So let's define the function here, and it calls this function whenever the subscribed components are unsubscribed from this counter. So in this part we can clear this interval. So let's get a reference to this interval first, and let's call clear interval, and let's pass this interval to it. So saving this. Now let's test this one. Opening the user page, the counter is initially 0, it is printing that number and increasing the numbers and printing it here. Now going back to home page, now the only component which was user page to subscribe to this store is gone now. So the Svelte is automatically calling this function to clear that interval. Then if we navigate back to user page, the count was 11. Going back to user page, so the count is the previous value of the readable, and then we are setting another interval which is starting the value from 0 and increasing one by one. So that's how the readable stores are working. We can also create a store based on the value of one or more stores. And for that, we can use derived function, importing derived from Svelte store. And for this one, let's say we will have another store right here. Let's create it, export const. Let's call this one as message, and it is derived from. Now we can use stores in this one, and let's use the counter store. And the second argument is the callback function to create this message store's value. And this is taking the value of the other store, and we can access to the value of the other store by referencing it with the $sign. So we are accessing to the counter, and we are, let's say, going to generate a number, generate a text like, let's say, if the counter is bigger than 5, returns a message like the count is increasing. Otherwise, let's say, return count is less than 5. So basically this is going to be generating a store value, either this one or this one, based on the other store's value. And let's use this right here in user page. So let's import message2, and let's just print the message value. So saving these changes. And here it is printed count is less than 5, and it is counting, and then we are seeing the count is increasing. So that's how the derived store is working. So with this way we are creating new store value based on the different store values. So this part was more about the example of store. We don't need this counter or the message store, so removing both of them. And that's it for this part.